Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Now into the studio this morning he comes, looking great this morning. Good morning, Michael Scott from Ward Councillor, and also our finance man for the Kapiti Coast District Council. Good morning, Michael.
Hello, Nigel. It's good to be in the studio this morning.
Yeah, you've been away, haven't you?
I had a very nice time away in Singapore for a few days, yes.
Right. Nice hot weather?
Oh, look, it was lovely.
Good.
And I got to look at all sorts of wonderful sites. Had a look at a water treatment plant.
Yep.
And the work they've done on closing off the river through the main part of town and using that as a reservoir. I thought that was a really interesting idea.
Oh.
And some new technology for a desalination plant. So I spent a day doing that, and it was actually fascinating.
Sure. Desalination in Singapore, they have much trouble with water, though, have they, at the moment?
Oh, look, the way it rains there, you'd think you could never have trouble with water again, and everything's so incredibly green.
Yes.
It was a real example of how you put plants down the middle of the streets and how you have trees on the side of buildings and stuff. I visited what they call a living building, and it had little terraces with gardens and trees on it. It had a roof garden where people were growing vegetables, but the whole building was designed so that the blinds in the offices have photocells on them.
Yes.
Just absolutely extraordinary technology.
Yeah, they do that in Frankfurt too.
Oh, okay.
Yes, fantastic. You know, you see the green plants and they've got solar systems there.
Yes.
They run the whole building on that, so yeah, that's fantastic. All right.
Extraordinary.
Now, I didn't get along to the Waikanae Community Board meeting on Tuesday night. I looked at the agenda. It's a huge agenda, and you gave away some money to some worthwhile organisations.
Yeah, so it was the Capital Improvement Fund round. What was sad, and I use the word carefully, was that we had to turn down a number of proposals which we would love to have funded, and our chairman made that very clear, but they just didn't meet the criteria. The Capital Improvement Fund is to top up a project which is nearly over the line, or has nearly got there, or has pulled together a whole lot of strings, so this funding will help it get there. It's not to fund the whole project itself. So that was disappointing. For the first time ever, unfortunately, the fire brigade in Waikanae had to be turned down because the application just didn't make the grade. So I think it's incumbent on the board now to get out and work with some of these groups who are wanting funding to make sure they understand what the criteria is, so that we can provide that funding. There's still about $12,000 in that account, so we might well, I suspect, roll that into next year's fund and have a slightly larger pool. The good thing about the Capital Improvement Fund interest is we don't lose it. We're able to use it in the future.
Well, that's grand news. So how many did you support in the end to get their organisation over the line?
Oh, look, quite a number. One of the interesting ones was we supported the Rekiarangi group who are wanting to put a public toilet at the end of the Mangoni track there, the walkway. Yeah. And they had submitted into the long-term plan, and there was simply no funds for that. But they've got DOC on their side to firstly come up with a whole lot of cash, and secondly, DOC's agreed to do the cleaning and the servicing. So they're better than 75% there. So that was an ideal use of the Capital Improvement Fund. And as their speakers indicated, this wasn't specifically dedicated just to Rekiarangi. It's for the whole community, because that part of the Te Arawa walkway is becoming more and more popular. So that was one of the ones where the board used a bit of lateral thinking and applied the criteria properly. We funded a sign for the hub in Waikanae, for example, so that it was a creative meeting. I know that some people went away and didn't get funded, and that's always a difficult position to be in, but overall I was very pleased with the funding round.
Okay, so you only have the interest on the fund each year to give out, don't you?
That's right. So we preserve the principal, although the board some years ago proposed spending $250,000 $100,000 of the fund on the development of the Mahara Gallery when that happens. So that's the first time in a little while we've actually dipped into the principal, but we've also ring-fenced a chunk of the principal to ensure that into the future there'll be funds for Waikanae developments as they come forward, not only this year but next year and in future trienniums.
Gosh, you had a load of discretionary grants to look at too, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Gracious.
And we had to do a bit of moving around because the discretionary grants fund was overdrawn, but there was some money in the promotion of Waikanae fund. So we did a bit of moving around. Those are funds that if you don't spend them, you lose them. You can't carry them over. So we made sure that we provided those funds.
Yes, and they were widespread too.
They were.
Right, now you had somebody talk about trees and cutting down on power lines in the Waikanae Park, did you, this occasion?
Yeah, so the Transpower have got a major project of doing some work over the next 4 or 5 years, but this was a slightly smaller one. A couple of the macrocarpers near the driveway off Park Ave have got to a height where we need to do something about them. One of them will get a bit of a trim, but there's one across on the southern side which is 7/8 dead. It's all brown now apart from one small part, so that'll make a wood merchant happy. The big thing for the community board was to get an absolute cast iron commitment from staff that when that Mac goes, we put a tree in its place. It's too easy to cut down, pack up the truck and go home. We're insistent that if you take one out, you put one in. So that there won't be just a big hole there left. There will be a tree going in. It probably won't be one that will grow quite that big, so we don't have to have the cutting issue all the time. But if it's dead, it's got to come down.
Yeah, sure.
Importantly, we also heard that line of dirty old stumps in front of the old cricket scoreboard in Waikanae Park are about to come out. They'll be gone in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
There was some discussion about whether we could cut them and make them into seats, but that would simply mean that you got a splinter in your derriere, so it seemed to me that Alison Law and her team have got it absolutely right. They need to be ripped out and that bank reinstated. And they'll take the opportunity at that point too, Nigel, to remove the old cricket scoreboard because it's about to fall over on someone. At the recent cross-country they had there, they had to continually ask little people to stop climbing on it because they were scared it was going to actually come down. It's rotten, so it needs to come out. Of course, the scoreboard on the other side is in place now, so that will tidy up what has been a bit of an eyesore, frankly, for the last few years.
That's been the gold seating for the park, Michael. You can remove it.
Yeah, no, it's going to go for safety reasons, and then we'll have a nice proper grassed bank, and then hopefully in the future we can again put back on the table that seating issue. Of course, next week at Council we will finally, I think, get to sign off the long-term plan. It seems to have been something that's been in councillors' lives now for at least 12 months. We started pre-consultation stuff a year ago, talking about where we might go. 3 days and 2 evenings of hearings, more submissions, more workshops, and as usual, a vast array of let's spend more money on this, that and the next thing. And that's very difficult to manage in what is a necessary spend less, pay back more, and close that depreciation gap, because that's the thing that's going to provide us some headroom in the future.
Yet you found $150,000 for the airways to get them up and going. So that's coming from a fund that was already there, though.
Yeah, so that's not new money, Nigel. It's interesting. I looked at a post on Facebook, which I entirely agreed with, which said it wouldn't matter what they did. Somebody would find something to criticise them on. So for a long time, we've been criticised in terms of our economic development that we can't show what we've done for it. So we've repurposed $50,000 each year for 3 years out of that existing budget for advertising. And it'll be alongside the $50,000, for example, that's still in the airport advertising budget from Air New Zealand for this year. But it's about advertising Kapiti. So sure, it's going to advertise the fact that there's an air service, but it's going to advertise Kapiti. It's going to talk about what you can do when you get here. It's going to talk about all of the services that we provide and what a cool place this is to come and visit. And we'll be able to absolutely track the spend. We'll be able to tell people and show people exactly what we spent it on. And if it comes off, and we think it will, then we're going to have a viable air service which will have some of the things that the Air New Zealand one didn't. Firstly, it's going to happen each day, so that it's going to be serviceable and reliable, and we're likely to get more flights to Auckland than we had before, and we can then begin the discussion about some flights to other places like Christchurch, and not in the middle of the morning and then in the early afternoon, which was worse than useless, at times that people actually want to go.
Yeah, sure. And those talks are on today too, aren't they?
Those talks are absolutely happening today because there's some decisions to be made today. So Council gave the Chief Executive some clear parameters within which to work with Airways and with Chathams and with the airport. But I'm really excited about where we're going to go. And frankly, if we spend $50,000 on advertising Kapiti, that's a great use of our money.
It is. That's what it was there for, wasn't it?
Exactly.
People have been saying you're not doing enough in that area.
And so now we're doing it, and some people are criticising us. It was interesting, I was on a Norwegian Airways flight this time last year from Copenhagen to Oslo, and they served Kapiti ice cream.
Yes.
And yet nobody on the flight could tell me how they got hold of the Kapiti ice cream or where Kapiti was. And I just thought, what an extraordinary opportunity wasted. They're serving Kapiti ice cream made in New Zealand, and there's nothing in the brochure, there's nothing in the magazine, and there's no advertising that says this is how you might like to get to where it was made.
Right.
I think we could do a lot better in a lot of what we do, and if this 50,000 is a start on that, then I'm all for it.
It's good to see the parties coming together, the Torrid Corporation and Air New Zealand for that matter, helping out to make sure this does come together.
Look, I think it is, because Air Chathams has been the de facto partner for Air New Zealand on any number of routes where Air New Zealand hasn't wanted to run them. Yeah, there are going to be some ongoing discussions about lineal ticketing, so that when you get on here, you get off at the other end and your bags follow you. But that's a development. We actually can't do everything at once, but what would be really nice is to see some aeroplanes taking off and landing again. And we know that we can get 30 seats out and 34 seats in, and we know that if we get 4 to 6 services a day, each day, every day, that's a great deal. The Colmar-Brunton poll, which the Chief Executive talked about before we went into public excluded, was really interesting. It was based on what people did last year. And we know that there's a pool of at least 90,000 people who took flights or would take flights or have come through or have used or have contemplated using Kapiti. Now, you know, these are huge numbers of people. It shows us that people would use Kapiti not because they live here, but because it's more convenient than fighting through the traffic to Wellington. We already have a group of people who use the flight anyway and have been clamouring for a replacement. But we also know from the leisure market that there's lots of people for whom a morning flight, not the 6:45 one, but a mid-morning flight to Auckland to catch up with the international services in the afternoon and early evening is going to be pretty important.
That quarter to 7 flight was quite a handy one though, wasn't it? Because a lot of those flights leave at past 11, so you've got to get over to there and get yourself organised.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly right. So look, I think that there's a lot of work gone in, and I think our Chief Executive, Wayne Maxwell, has done an extraordinary job of making sure that we're front and centre and getting what we want. We're repurposing current money. There's nothing new in there, and we're just going to have to wait and see where we go with our applications to the Regional Development Fund. But I'm pretty confident that at the end of the day, we're not going to be spending any money that we hadn't already budgeted for economic development.
Might encourage businesses to get out here.
Well, look, it would. We've now been able to have the police open their base here. That didn't happen last Thursday. That's been a discussion that's been going on for at least 10 months.
Right.
And of course, people say, why are you having a public excluded session, or why is the door shut? Well, because of really good economic reasons that sometimes you can't talk about it until after it opens.
120 jobs. That's a lot for the coast, isn't it?
120 new jobs to start with.
Yes.
That's 120 jobs we didn't have. And of course, we're working with government departments to say, hey, look, for resilience purposes, why have you got all your local staff here having to come into Wellington? Why can't they work from hubs in Kapiti? This is how it starts, and the police is the first of what I expect to be any number of announcements in the coming years about some more development and some more jobs here.
Michael, we thank you for your time. Run out as usual, but we could talk for hours. But we do appreciate your call in this morning. Have a talk to you in a fortnight's time.
Nigel, it's always great to be on Beach FM.
Michael Scott, Ward Councillor for the Waikanae Community Board, also our finance man on the Kapiti Coast District Council.
106.3 Beach FM.